Hey everyone, welcome back to A Piece of Faith. I'm your host, Angeline, and I'm so glad you're here. If you've been following along, you know that this podcast is all about faith, healing, and real conversations about life. I always say this is where we talk about all the things. Now, today's episode is one that's really close to my heart. It is talking about the mental health in the Black community. For too long, we've carried a heavy silence around this topic, and it's time to break it. And I must say that over the last decade, there seems to be a just kind of a shift where we're seeing that more of the Black and brown community, more of the Afro-American community, folks across the diaspora, we are starting to seek therapy. So I must say there is a shift that's happening, but not completely, right? I think that there seems to this day be a stigma associated with receiving mental health, going to the doctor, right? There's this distrust. And, I want to say this topic today is not just about talking about statistics and headlines. It's really about our families, our friends, and ourselves getting the support that we need and understand that there's nothing weak or there should not be any shame around, hey, I might be struggling with my mental health. There's nothing weak around that. And I think we have to have an honest conversation about why there is this distrust, why also too that mental health in the Black community, there's this heavy silence, and why now we're starting to slowly see the shift, but why the shift continues to be there. Let's talk about the stigma. In our community, strength has always been a survival skill. Think about it. And what chapter, or when I say chapter, I'm talking about chapter in history. What decade in history, what century in history that has a community, we've always been taught these survival skills. And now what I'm saying is that we no longer have to operate out of survival mode. The stigma is that we've been taught to push through it, to keep going, to not let anyone see us weak. And it served a purpose. It served a purpose in a time where we did have to survive. Resiliency was taught as being beautiful, and the fact that being resilient is. It's also understanding that it's beautiful to say, I need some support. I need some help. I'm struggling. And that in itself is a beautiful thing, to be able to say, I can't do this by myself. So part of the stigma that exists is the need to be strong, But stigma in the Black community doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's a lot of it comes from history, like I was saying. It's lived experiences that create a deep mistrust in the healthcare system. For example, some of you may have heard, and some of you may not have heard, of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, where Black men were left untreated for decades just so researchers could watch the progression of the disease. Where they do that at? Who do they do that to? Us, right? And that was less than 100 years ago. Less than 100 years ago. So some of that, right, some of that residue continues to be felt of that effect today. Another stigma, right, or another distrust, I would say, not stigma, because it is true, right? The stats show it. That reality is that Black women are 3 or more times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women, even today. The fact also in the mental health field, right, in my field, Black people are often misdiagnosed. For example, right, depression or trauma may be overlooked, while schizophrenia is overdiagnosed in Black men. And that depression and trauma oftentimes may show up differently in Black women and Black men, especially in Black women, right? I'm speaking from a lived experience of working with Black women, but also being a Black woman, right? Oftentimes, depression and trauma shows up as, this idea of being strong and we got to do it all, and taking up multiple degrees, taking up multiple roles, and trying to keep it all together while masking the fact that, hey, we're struggling right now. We're struggling. All of these examples, some of these examples are just examples of how these scars reinforce the belief that healthcare isn't always for us, or that it can be, or that we can't trust it. And on top of that, sometimes we hear things like, Oh, we don't do therapy. I know, growing up, I often heard, hey, leave it to God. And trust me, I'm not downplaying God's ability to show up and work, but I also believe that God has also provided support in our lives, and that's how He shows up. I've heard just pray it away, while unintentionally dismissing therapy or medication. And there's the stigma, especially if you are in the faith community, that, medication is a bad thing, which is not true. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Faith is powerful. Prayer is powerful. But we can also embrace the resources, like I was saying earlier, that God has provided through counseling, through support groups, and through mental health professionals. You can love God and go to therapy. Those two things don't cancel each other at all. They can actually strengthen one another. Another piece of this silence, I would have to say, is how many of us grew up in a household where we didn't talk about depression, anxiety, or trauma? For some of us, we really weren't exposed, and not because our parents didn't want us being exposed, but because they also didn't understand or didn't know themselves. For some of us, especially if we're first generation Americans, our parents, their focus was coming to this country to get a better life for us and for their families. So their focus was for us to go to school, get good grades, don't get in trouble with the law, and show up while they busted their behinds. So the idea of, depression, the idea of anxiety or even trauma of their own, they don't even understand that. We might have known someone who was struggling, but it was brushed off as they'll be all right. That silence can be heavy. It teaches us to smile outside of while we're falling apart inside. It isolates us. And the truth is, silence doesn't protect us. It keeps us stuck. So this is why it's so important when it comes to mental health in the Black and Brown community, in the Afro-American community, and across the diaspora in the Caribbean. I think it's so important to understand, and it's okay for us to say out loud that I am not okay and I need support. This is going to sound cliche, but it's okay to say, it's okay to say that it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to say I need support. It looks like checking in on one another, creating safe spaces to be able to share our truth. So, question, right? How do we break this cycle? First, I would say is by normalizing conversations about mental health, especially if you are in the faith community. It is okay to share with one another that you are struggling with your mental health. I think it's okay to ask our friends, how is your mental health? How are you doing? How's your mind? How's your heart? Second, and let's actually go back before I say second. I think it's not just saying how you're doing, but it's generally checking in and saying, how is your mind, right? And beyond how you're feeling today. It could be, how is this season of your life treating you? And then also, I think it's important to understand that people may not have the capacity fully or the words to express what's fully going on, but at least knowing that you create that safe space for them to be able, and if they're able, and when they're able, to share it. I think that's important. Now, second, by using tools available to us is another way that we break that cycle. And when I say by tools, I'm talking about therapy. therapy, right? Therapy or life coach, journaling, praying, support groups, meditation, and even medication. I always say sometimes getting with a good therapist, getting together with a good psychiatrist to be able to get some good medications prescribed, just until you are able to learn the tools where you're able to go from survival to growth. We're able to go from survival and growth to thriving. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily on medication the rest of your life, but it could just be that you need medication in this season of your life. And also, too, if you need medication in this season of your life, and then when you're able to gain some tools and you're growing, you're no longer on medication, great. But for some of us, right, and for some people, it might mean, hey, I have a bipolar disorder. So that might mean, you know what, I have to be on this journey, this lifelong journey of being on medication. has one of the tools, but not the only tool. And I would say the third thing is give yourselves, I think, permission, give ourselves permission to rest, permission to heal, permission to choose ourselves without feeling guilty, to permission to work on this journey of healing, and whatever that healing looks like. Because healing is not always just about trauma. Healing could be, let me work on my anxiety that I'm working on, right? For some of us, maybe it's post-traumatic stress. Maybe it's PTSD. For other people, it's depression. Or it could just be this, you haven't had this traumatic event that happened to you, but it's stress, the day-to-day stress, right? So being able to set some boundaries without feeling guilty. As a community, I think it's important for us to start rewriting the story for the next generation. And I must give us credit. I want to say that we really started to do that. But I think there needs to be more education, more awareness, and more conversations. Can you imagine if our children were growing up in homes where mental health check-ins were a norm, where crying wasn't seen as shameful, and where asking for help was celebrated instead of it being something that was silenced? I think that would be phenomenal. And I do believe in my heart of heart that we are headed that way. But in order for us to stay on that track, we got to continue having these conversations and continue to give ourselves permission. Permission, like I said, to rest, permission to heal, and permission to choose ourselves without guilt. So I want to say, if you're listening today and you've been carrying something in silence, I want you to know these things. You don't have to carry it alone. Healing is very possible. Therapy is for us too, and you're worthy of that support and peace. Did you hear what I said? Therapy is for us too. I'm talking to you. Anybody that is part of the Black and Brown community, the Afro-American or Afro-Caribbean community, and across the diaspora. Therapy is for us too, and you are worthy of the support and peace. Remember, seeking help is not a weakness. It doesn't disconnect you from your relationship with God. It's also, to me, I believe it's wisdom. It's using the wisdom that God gave you. It's strength. And I honestly believe it's part of honoring the life God has given you to experience. So I hope this conversation was helpful. I really do. And, I want to leave you with I want to leave you with some reflection questions. And I would say, what messages about mental health did you grow up hearing in your family or community? And ask yourself, was that in this stage of your life, right? If you grew up hearing or not hearing any messages about mental health, now that you're thinking about your mental health, does therapy and what you're trying to do support that? And maybe going against, the messages that you heard about mental health in order to thrive. And I would have to say another maybe reflection question is, how can you help break the silence? I think that's a better one than the first one. I'll leave you with this. Yes. How can you help break the silence for someone else in your circle about mental health? If you're somebody that believes that, mental health, again, therapy is not a bad thing. There's no shame around it. Maybe what you can do is help break the silence for somebody else in your circle. So, and I would actually encourage you to. So I'm going to add one more. I'm going to encourage you to take one small step that you can do this week to prioritize your mental health. All right. So let's kind of sum this up. What's one small step you can take this week to prioritize your mental health, like journaling, maybe looking into therapy, maybe reaching out to someone, and maybe you're already doing all those things. So I would say, if you're already doing those things, I would say, how can you help break the silence for someone else in your circle? So thank you so much for tuning into this episode of A Piece of Faith. If this message resonated with you, please share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And connect with me on Instagram at Pieces of Me Journey to Healing. for more encouragement. And you can also check out my website at www.piecesofme.journeytohealing.com. All words. Until next time, be blessed, community.